Juliet, can you level this? I'll put the next camera. It's not level. Should I not do it? Well, I mean, I don't.
Can you just focus on that camera?
Okay, no. I really didn't know why either, but I figured that they were saying that too. Okay. I must be
I think the background is focused.
Hi there. How
Hi,
you
how are
doing?
you? Nice to
Good.
see you.
I have a question for you. Are you capturing this, or you're just streaming? So
We're
no
streaming
capture?
it.
So no capture.
They'll be
Okay.
recording it. They'll be recording. They'll be recording it from the live stream upstairs.
Okay, so they will have a copy. I just want to see what you guys are getting, so we're not redundant.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please pay me no attention. I'm just checking the sound for the cameras. Hope you're all enjoying your breakfast this morning.
All right, good morning. Everybody really heard me last night when I was like, get here on time. You guys are amazing. We are still waiting for our most honored guest, Chief Vincent Mann of the Ramapough Nation. So while he's getting parking and arriving, we're just going to take care of some logistical things. My name's Liz Shevchenko. I'm director of the Humanities Action Lab, if there's anybody I didn't meet last night. I just wanted to start by giving you all a chance, although I think you have been, to introduce each other. We are together the Humanities Action Lab, so no presentation that I'm going to give is as relevant to explaining what this thing is all about than you all introducing each other. So I'm sure you've been talking about lots of different things, but if you could take a moment to find somebody, turn to your neighbor, unless you know your neighbor really well, in which case you got to find somebody you don't know, and just introduce yourself, and then say, if you could tell them how you got here, what your relationship has been to this that brought you here, and one thing that you think is important for somebody to know about why you're here, and what, if you've done things with the Humanities Action Lab before, what the Humanities Action Lab is. So who you are, how you got here, and one thing about your work here and what the Humanities Action Lab means for you. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then we'll tell you some more. All right. I can see a lot of good exchanges happening. I now want to bring you back together so you also can meet some of the people on the team who have brought us all together today. So you know who to go to, and also kind of how this all came together. So the first person you probably met was all of the amazing students from Rutgers University's Newark's Honors Living and Learning Community. And you'll hear from Dean Tim Eatman in a little bit about this incredible group and this kind of vision. And they have all been both gathered and supervised by another HLLC student, Maria Zamora, who has been coordinating all of the logistics and everything that went into bringing everybody together today. And anybody who's ever done anything like this, you know how much that is. And she herself was guided by Margie Weinstein, Hal's associate director, who, by the way, was acting director of HAL for most of the time of this project, between the time we came together before and now. So she's really been guiding the whole ship since then. The most important thing you need to know about Margie for today and tomorrow is she is the timekeeper. You know where she's sitting. She's sitting right there. Do not ignore her when she has her 5 and her 2 and her 1. And she said she's even going to stand up and do this if she sees that you're ignoring her, so do not ignore her. But also, she's a great resource for anything about the Humanities Action Lab and how it works and the projects. And another really important resource is someone else hiding behind a pillar. So in addition to Dr. Weinstein, another really important source of perspective and information is Dr. Shana Russell. She's project manager for States of Incarceration, which was another project we all did together that you'll hear a little bit more about in a minute. So she can really answer any questions you might have about what this looks like on the other side and how to make the process really smooth. She's also the one who's taking really detailed notes throughout this whole event. So any comments and ideas and questions and concerns, she's going to really hear them and make sure that they're captured. So finally, I want to introduce Dr. Aaliyah Brown. She's a director. I think you all know her in one way or the other from a tiny little screen or an email of this current initiative, and she's really leading you through the next 2 days. And we're really grateful to the ACLS Mellon Public Fellows Program. I think John Paul is here somewhere for making it possible for us to work with Aaliyah as a public fellow because she's really made this whole program possible. So she's just going to introduce a few logistical items while we wait to have the formal start of the meeting a little bit later.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that you all are here. I'm so glad that we're convened together and we'll be able to exchange some wonderful ideas. But before we start, I wanted to run through some logistical things. So as you can see back here on the screen, we have our social media handles, and we really want you all to be active because this is another way that we can expand our reach of the project and let people know the wonderful work that you're doing. So this will always be up, and we'll have slides for all of our partners. So if you have Twitter handles, you'll be able to follow along there. The next thing that I want to draw your attention to is at the back of the room, towards this way, and then also on your right, is the agenda. So if you ever need to figure out what we're doing or where we are, if you didn't get a chance to look at the agenda on your device, you can see it in those 2 places. And then just also thinking about the space, the bathrooms are right outside that door. And I think that's it for all of our logistical announcements. So we are so glad that you are here, and we'll get started in just a few moments. Thank you.
Is there anything else we can do? I mean, not that we need to keep them busy, but is there anything else we can get rid of? I know, it means that we really have to. Is there anything else that we were going to, that was going to take time? Because that's so smart, the internet. Oh yeah. Good morning. So you can get up. Talk about the internet.
Okay, I'm back for another quick announcement. I just realized that I asked you all to get on the internet without giving you instructions about how to get on the internet here. So if you get on your device and look at the little internet icon, so you can do this on your mobile device or your tablet or Mac PC, and you choose Are You Wireless? And then it will ask you to sign in as a guest, and then you should be okay from there. So this will be important because we don't have any of our documents printed out for the convening, and you can access all of the documents that we shared with you via the Google folder that we sent a few days ago. So if anyone has trouble finding that, you can just raise your hand and I'll help you find the Google folder that has all of our information, including the agenda and different parts of the worksheets that we'll be working on. Okay, thanks. That's great. Are you on Twitter?
Okay, I'm going to ask anybody who's grabbing food to come and sit back down. And I want to introduce you to someone who has been an incredible source of guidance and support to the Humanities Action Lab, which only moved to Rutgers Newark a year ago. And we came to learn about this incredible program that you'll hear about in a minute, that all of the students who are here working are from. So I want to introduce Dr. Tim Eatman, who's the Dean of the Honors Living and Learning Community. And he's going to share a little bit about that and also his work on the Truth and Healing and Reconciliation project that's here at Rutgers Newark. Thank you so much. And he's got a cold, so like go easy on him. He came all the way when he's sick. Thank you, Dr. Eatman.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. A little low, as Liz said, but still excited to be here. Anytime action follows the word humanities, it ought to activate you a bit, right? I heard about the Humanities Action Lab about maybe 8 years ago when I was directing a national consortium called Imagining America, and learned about the sites of incarceration work, and really became thrilled to hear that there were those like yourselves pushing very rigorously for us to re-envision and reimagine possibilities of how we can use the humanities to deepen and broaden knowledge. Imagine my delight to arrive here at Rutgers Newark and to learn that the Humanities Action Lab would be coming to this place. And so it has been a really great pleasure to connect with the whole staff and affiliated partners. I see them around the room. And then even more so to connect the students from the Honors Living Learning community at Rutgers Newark. That deserves a hand in and of itself. You see, this is the reason that I get up in the morning. These young people here are helping us to think powerfully about what it means to revolutionize the concept of what honors is. Is this on? Honors is just not about some metric. It is about how we understand our responsibility to be in the world. We are excited to be in a place where we can do that kind of reimagining. 48% of our students are from the city of Newark in the Honors College. We're excited, that's right. We're excited about the idea of revolutionizing honors in a context that helps us to recognize where diversity, access, and inclusion meets this notion of academic excellence. And I promise you, our students are academically excellent. If you saw a PBS NewsHour special that ran a few weeks ago where Dean Escalin, who I see is in the room, and myself and other students were profiled, you heard that 11 of our students, 13 graduated last year, 11 graduated with the highest honors, summa cum laude, right? 8, 2 of them were magna cum laude, 1 was cum laude. I graduated thank you loud. I don't know about y'all. I'm getting the sign, so I have to cut across the field. The reason that I give you some context about these Honors Living Learning Community students and this staff that I love so much, and the connection that we're making with the Humanities Action Lab, is because it's for real. We have this notion of local citizenship in a global world, and we think that we can operationalize that by doing things like partnering with the Humanities Action Lab on the course that we're doing right now. That's about climate change and environmental justice, that's led by Professor Winokur. and in collaboration with the Ironbound Community Corporation. Our students are really involved with that and engaged deeply with that. We think that it's powerful that our students are very involved in leading the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Initiative. Rutgers University is one of the 10 initial campus centers supported by the Kellogg Foundation and the Association for American Colleges and Universities. We think that there's important work to be done in this regard. We walk around with two questions: what if and how so? I think your gathering today challenges us to the imagination of what if and the nitty-gritty work of how so. Thank you very much.
And now I'd like to thank Chief Vincent Mann of the Turtle Clan of the Ramapough Lunaape Nation for convoking this gathering for us.
Kiha Kolomosi, Ninjushinzi, Kikai Man, Nin Delanopawi, the Ramapough Mountains, Anishi Kishalamoquain, Elamiliang Yonkwai Kishquik, Wak Kukana Aki, Wak Tinda, Wak Mbi, Wakilongot Mati, Wak Nimbu Mausawakanam, Anishik, 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 Anishik. I said, how are you doing? My name is Chief Mann. I come from the Ramapough Mountains. I also said, thank you, Creator, for giving us this day, our Mother Earth, the fire, the water. Thank you for all of our relations, and most importantly, thank you for our lives. And then I thanked the four directions. It's important for us here to acknowledge those who have walked the paths and trails which became roads before us, and that is our ancestors, the Munsee Lunaape. When we speak in this form of language, they don't understand that. Language or words are in the form of vibrations that travel on the wind and through the land and the trees into the earth. So when we speak in our language, even if it's only one word, that we acknowledge our ancestors and those who came before us. So I did that for you all today, as well as your ancestors. So with that, I guess we can begin. And the word for thank you is anishik. And the word for your welcome is yo. So if you'd like to use those words today, you could honor our ancestors as well. So anishik.
Thank you to Tim, and thank you, Chief Mann, for getting us started officially in this journey we're going to take together that we never know where it's going to end when we start one of these things. And I really, again, as I did last night, want to thank all of you for taking the time away from the work that's so urgent that you have at home to come together and build something that's for all of us, in addition to for your own work in your own communities. Together, as we talked about earlier, we make up the Humanities Action Lab. We're a coalition of universities, community organizations, and public spaces as well around the country. And now, thanks to our new partners around the world, that's led right here from Rutgers, Newark. And together, we build participatory public memory projects. So these are projects that bring together thousands of people across many diverse communities to explore the historical roots of the social justice issues that we're facing and think about those and how they can help us address their contemporary legacies. So what I wanted to do is, since many of you, especially on the first day, might be looking around the room wondering, how are we all going to work together, and how is it possible for all of us together to create one common project? And is that even worth it? You know, because it's hard. But I just wanted any of the new folks to know that we have done it before and give you a little glimpse, so maybe you can envision the potential of the work that you're starting here. In 2012, some of the folks in this room launched the Guantanamo Public Memory Project. This brought together students and people with direct experience at the U.S. Naval Base at Guantanamo to create the first exhibit of the history of this detention center. It started with 9 partners and ultimately engaged over 550,000 people in 22 cities. And just raise your hand if you're here and you participated in that. I know there's, so if anybody is interested in learning more about that, please ask the folks who were there from the beginning. So this experience connected and inspired new collaborations between local partners working on incarceration in their own communities. So in 2014, we came together to explore the different historical roots of mass incarceration in each of our localities, and how knowing this could help address the legacies of this history today. We first came together across 20 cities. So raise your hand if you were part of the States of Incarceration project. Okay, so there's more people that you can talk to if you're interested in hearing more about that. But we've since been joined by 10 more that haven't even started working on it yet. And in each city, a university and a organization directly working with directly impacted people and a public space all collaborated to create one piece of what became this larger project, each piece focusing on one local history. So through courses that were offered simultaneously across all these partner universities, over 800 students and others directly impacted by incarceration collaborated to dig in to the roots in their localities and then share this history, share what was most important to be learned from this history through different kinds of exhibit media. We then put all the stories together into one traveling exhibit and a web platform that you can still check out that traveled to 22 different cities with public events and actions and dialogues and story circles in all of these different places at public libraries, community centers, and museums. With these projects, we hoped to kind of mobilize new communities and new collaborations into a public memory movement that addressed contemporary challenges with the full reckoning and understanding of the past. So then in 2017, as this project was still going, and it's still going now, we started asking our local partners about other interconnected issues in their communities that they thought such a participatory public memory project could mobilize people around. And many of you pointed to the ways that climate change and environmental degradation were mapping and exacerbating long histories of inequality in your communities. So we all began to reach out to people working on the front lines of climate and environmental justice to learn how a participatory public memory project might mobilize people around this issue. So we've since grown to engage new partners with new expertise that are all here now, who have a lot of wisdom to share in new parts of the country and now new parts of the world. So we just recognize that we're coming to this from a lot of different vantage points and perspectives and levels of experience or type of experience, but we're coming together with a spirit of openness, of learning for each other, and a shared commitment to honoring the frontline and environmental justice communities that have been working on these issues for generations and coming up with creative solutions. So I just thank you in advance for your kind of honesty and generosity and understanding with each other. And I also want to thank all the people who made it possible for you to come here, including the Rutgers Newark's Chancellor's Office that has believed in this from the beginning, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, which is really looking at how this can build new conversation here in Newark and across the state, and especially Express Newark, which is the space that we're in. So you've already met the team, which is fantastic. So I want to just reintroduce Dr. Aaliyah Brown, who's going to tell you a little bit more about this project and what we're doing over the next couple of days, and just say how much I've learned already from Aaliyah over the last year and how much I look forward to continuing to learn from her. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Liz, for giving the introduction to HAL. So the presentation that I'm going to give is a bit of an overview of the Climate and Environmental Justice Initiative here at HAL, and then I'll share a little bit about the interventions that we're hoping to make, and maybe as with our time together, we can think about other ways that we might make interventions. And then I'll talk a little bit about what we are going to do as we convene together, given that we usually convene about once a year. So a few weeks ago, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report warning that the severe effects of climate change were coming much earlier than previously predicted. So this speaks to the urgent nature of the types of projects that we seek out with HAL. We look at urgent contemporary social issues and investigate the deep histories that they have. So they identify 2020 as the year by which much of the world would experience food shortages, massive droughts, flooding, and other extreme weather events. But many communities around the world have already started experiencing these negative climate change events. And these we'll refer to as environmental justice communities, frontline communities, and they're relegated to what we call, what have been identified as sacrifice zones. So these are particular regions that are deliberately economically disenfranchised and environmentally impaired. So, and more specifically, for generations, these are indigenous, African American, immigrants and migrants, and low wage earners, people who inhabit these spaces. So they essentially, what I'm saying is, have suffered the brunt of environmental degradation, now exacerbated by climate change. Many of these frontline communities have already honed and continue to form theories and practices that are culturally responsive, justice-centered, and good for the environment. And just to give you all a little understanding of the principles that we're being guided by is through just transitions. And I wanted to bring them up to call the attention to that they're already doing the work. So our work here at HAL is not to come up with the theories and ideas, but to follow the lead of people of color who have already thought about how to transition from extractive economies to generative economies and extractive environments to generative environments. What we also know about frontline communities is that they are most likely to politically organize around what some call green policies. So they are already moving in the direction, both on the ground and politically, of making the environment better and more sustainable. Yet their knowledge and experience and political power have been kept to the margins of the mainstream climate and environmental work. So those are kind of the key ideas that we're moving forward with this project, is understanding that people of color have been on the front lines of experiencing all of this, but they have also been on the front lines of creating solutions. So this is something that we should remember as we're all moving forward today. So how did we get to this project? So a year ago, many of you were here. Raise your hand if you were here at the October convening last year. Great. So a year ago, many of our partners at the Humanities Action Lab came together, and we identified what we had individually and then what we had together as a coalition that can contribute to this movement of climate and environmental justice and pedagogy and working in immersive learning. So as Liz mentioned, we are universities and organizations working on climate and environmental justice in public spaces in now 23 cities across North America, South America, and Europe. And we have this wonderful nifty map that shows all of the sites that all of you all actually, so you're all represented here on this map. We come from very different vantage points. Some of us participated because you participated in the last HAL project. Some are interested in this particular subject matter, and some are interested in public history and public memory and how that influences justice. So this is how we all kind of came to be. And through this process, we've identified common principles and approaches. So as I mentioned earlier, we are taking the lead of Climate Justice Alliance and also the environmental justice principles. But then we ourselves, as this coalition, came up with kind of some working rules of engagement that, and goals that we would like to see happen. So again, as I said, is that we will always, the first is that we will always defer to the people who are already on the ground. And the second is that we'll always center the work of frontline communities. And again, this will come up often, so I won't pull up the links now, but you'll be able to see later. The principles of environmental justice. And then using these principles last year, some of you remember, we came up with kind of goals for the project. So we wanted to find and demonstrate connections between multiple local stories and communities and integrate them into the common project that is more than the sum of its parts. We wanted to establish a new community-centered and history and memory-based training system for the next generation of climate leaders. And we wanted to generate public dialogue and engagement around how to prevent injustices related to environmental and climate justice issues. And the way that we're pursuing this is through all of our work together and creating these local stories, which are based on locality. So it's rooted in your city. And here, that's from Indianapolis to Mexico City to Milwaukee. All of you are contributing these local stories from your perspective. That's history, investigating the change over time and the deep roots of all of these issues. And then justice, our call to action. So, and then I'll just quickly talk a little bit about the process, which we'll have more time to flesh this out later. It's a multi-year process, and you all are starting your courses in the spring. That's when you'll be working with your community partner and developing your local story, and your students will have exchanges with each other. And then in the fall of 2019, that's when the exhibition will launch here in Newark, and then it will travel to each of the spaces that created it. So that's process. And then we're also quickly thinking about what can a project like this do? What can such a large platform that will travel to the different cities, and then also what can the web platform do? What can that all do together? And we're hoping that this can address climate denial. we're also hoping that the story-based approach will move people in a way that we know that data alone, raw data alone, hasn't. So the storytelling is key, and that's what we will keep talking about throughout the entire convening is storytelling, how to make your story personal, and so that it's readable and legible throughout the international platform and the ways that it travels. And then we believe that this is, again, a way to mobilize more people. So this is a little bit about what we will be doing here at the convening. This is a way for us to think about how to develop equitable partnerships. So a lot of you all are here with your community partners, and we're so appreciative of your time and for coming here. But we want to think deeply about how to develop equitable partnerships so that both the community partner and the university partner and students can get a benefit out of this process. Then we are going to spend a lot of time refining your local stories. So a lot of you all have already identified your entry point, but we want to sharpen and refine what you have been working on. And we'll think about next steps. And then we'll also give you all a chance to experience Newark and storytelling through art making. So we're really thrilled to have you all here. And this is going to be a wonderful convening. And with that, I am going to welcome up the first panel so that we can get this kicked off. Thank you.
Start up here or down there?
Yeah, it's not a slide, it's a snap, pop it up.
Pop it up. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
To make it easy. There we go.
Wherever.
There's the water.
As long as this microphone can hear us.
I'm sure it can.
Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. My name is Jack Chen. I've just started here at Rutgers Newark. I am the director of the Clement A. Price Institute on campus. I've got the honor of being the first person to occupy that position. Clement was a much beloved person on campus, but also throughout the state of New Jersey, and increasingly playing a national role. He sadly passed away 4 years ago, and there's such an outpouring of sadness and love for this man who had been really pioneering African American and public history in the state of New Jersey, but also in the region, that people decided to raise an endowed chair for him. So I'm very happy to be coming here. I've been at NYU for 22 years, and it's my job to kind of say a few words of comment to contextualize the panel, and then we're going to be going to the panel itself. So it's really wonderful to meet some of you for the first time and for some old friends and colleagues. So it's really delightful. When Aaliyah was speaking, what struck me was really this whole question of climate denial. And the question of how climate denial, at least for me, and I think it's part of the challenge that we have for this panel, is linked historically. And what does that mean? And how can we unpack that? And of course, there are variations in all the places that we're at, right? So I just wanted to share maybe some personal stories, and that's what we're going to continue doing on the panel itself. For me, it begins in South Brooklyn, Sunset Park, where I live, which is on the lower, on the descending hill towards New York Harbor, from an end moraine, which was left by the glaciers. Sunset Park, also on the ridge of Sunset Park, the local story is, and I think it's actually true, was a trail, an Indian trail that had probably been there for thousands of years. And that's all we say in the neighborhood. That's all we know. We don't even know the name of the Indians, right, who had created that trail. So when Vinny talks about the trail, we're literally talking about an elaborate network of trails up and down the East Coast going into the Great Lakes. So this is just a little part of that trail. But that's not the story. And Sunset Park in some ways is important to understand briefly, but that's also not entirely the story. But I should just say that because it goes down to the New York harbor, it was also the place that various kinds of ethnics, from Finnish, radical Finnish dock workers, to Italian Americans, to Irish Americans, were working on the docks before the days of container ships. And also we have, at a certain moment, someone like Robert Moses, who's the notorious builder of highways and destroyer of neighborhoods, ramming his Gowanus Expressway down the middle of the actual neighborhood itself, tearing out the stores that were there, tearing out the life of the community. And then what happened was what people refer to in urban planning, but also as a way to stigmatize neighborhoods, blight. Urban blight took in, and it became a poor working class neighborhood. Those who decided to stay became part of a multiracial mix with the Puerto Ricans and other Latinos who moved in. I've been there since 1983. And Chinese began to move in, not because of me, but, but because in many ways there's a complicated problem that all of you who are in cities understand, which is that instead of the Irish, the Scandinavians, the Finnish, who were living up by 7th and 8th Avenue and had been living in the larger area, started seeing that they were going to, well, their children were starting to move out into the suburbs. And they're also feeling, once again in Brooklyn, the problems of redlining, and also their decisions of who they would begin to sell their buildings to. This is another complicated story I won't get into, but many Chinese started moving into that area on 8th Avenue. So we've got this very complicated mixture of this one neighborhood of a couple of 100,000 people. So we're not talking about a small neighborhood. Many of you may come from smaller areas in the country than that, but that's just one tiny neighborhood in all of New York City, and adjacent to us are Palestinians and all these other groups. Many choose to stay, many choose to leave. And that's not the story either. Okay, so the story I want to tell is really the drive that I take from South Brooklyn over the Verrazano Bridge. Verrazano Bridge, if you recall, in Saturday Night Fever, if you're old enough to remember Saturday Night Fever, is that bridge that the youth are actually playing on, and then one of them actually falls off, right, and kills himself. That bridge to the promised land for many Italian Americans and many white ethnics to Staten Island. Staten Island becomes a place of really escape, but it's also, of course, where redlining had pointed people towards in terms of the downtown Brooklyn area and the neighborhoods like mine. So for me in Brooklyn, who's been there since much of my life, the thought is that, well, Staten Island, that's not even a borough, right? I mean, you've heard this probably, any New Yorker, right? Tim is confirming, right? You know, Staten Island, that's, you know, we've got 5 boroughs, but Staten Island is kind of the low end of, you know, that's our attitude, right? And then when you go over to North Jersey, right, that's even worse, right? That's where the smokestacks are, and it smells, the industrial pollution. Now, that's been my attitude for most of my life in New York, quite frankly. But as I started coming here on this campus, but also coming out of being on the New York Mayor's Commission on monuments and landmarks and historical monuments, markers, and public art, I began realizing that there's a deeper story that I had to grapple with. And I'm just going to tell it very briefly because I don't really have too much time, which is that when the mayor set it up, he was talking about getting rid of Columbus Circle. And Columbus Circle, as many of you may realize, is at 59th Street in Manhattan. And immediately, many Italian, not all Italians, but many Italian groups, many of them who live in Staten Island, start getting very angry immediately at the mayor, who is in part Italian-American. How dare he broach the possibility of taking away, really, Columbus, who Italian-Americans have embraced in their efforts to fight against racism, anti-Italian racism, and in their efforts to kind of, in which there are lynchings in Louisiana, in which the virulent racism, as Jews had been subject to racism, began to strategize to say, well, we're going to identify with who the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants reference as the bringer of civilization to the Americas, right? That whole story. And Columbus becomes part of that strategy and has been held tightly ever since then. So how dare this mayor try to wrest away Columbus from that effort to survive and claim a sense of dignity, right? At the same time, Staten Island is really the place, as we've been doing research and going to visit the Staten Island Museum and discovering very significant historic sites, is actually one of the very important places in which Lunaape peoples had been. And it's also a beautiful island in which that end moraine that is throughout Long Island, going into Brooklyn, going across into Staten Island, continues, and that end moraine is really responsible for the oysters that used to be plentiful. This used to be the major oyster growing region in the world. Now, so that trip over to Newark has reinvigorated a sense that we need to have these dialogues that can begin to deal with the kind of the denial that happens. And there's layers of denial here. The inability, for example, of us to grapple with this history is also linked to the inability to grapple with a place like Staten Island, in which the deep history that's there on that island, but in the region of Lunaape, is in part disappeared and marred because we can't deal with the fact that we're on this incredible land that was one of the most biodiverse lands in the world, because what happened is that the immigrants that have since arrived have been mainly involved in the industrial extraction business, right? And that the livelihoods of people has really depended on that fact. So it's very hard to grapple with how beautiful and biodiverse the land was without even romanticizing it, but understanding that there were whales going up the Hudson River. There were whales. In 1609, there were whales going up the Hudson River. And we can't imagine a whale anywhere close now, right, except on the tip of Long Island. So if we can begin to grapple with these kinds of questions, how can we grapple with the erasures and the unresolved issues between groups, and how, in many ways, those distractions are just like today. In many ways, we're caught up in these distractions, are keeping us away from grappling with the fact that we're in this incredibly diverse bioregion that historically needs to be recognized, but there's still the possibility of some of it being kind of connected with. And to me, the kind of reconnection with Lunaape history, for me personally as a historian, is tied to also my rediscovery of what perhaps the hope that we can gain in terms of climate change and climate justice. So let me just end there and then introduce the panel. And what I asked the panelists, really just as a simple way of starting out, is maybe they could tell us a little bit about where they got involved in climate justice issues on a kind of a personal, anecdotal level, where you come from in that. And maybe I'll ask each of them to start there, and then we'll begin a conversation. So if we don't mind, maybe, if you wouldn't mind, Risha, yeah, so here's the mic.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Risha Chansky. I'm here today from the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez. Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you. I'm a narratologist, and I study life stories. That's my scholarly work. I'm the editor of the journal AB Autobiography Studies and of the Routledge Autobiography Studies book series. As I'm sure all of you know, approximately 1 year ago, we had a Category 5 hurricane sweep across Puerto Rico. I position that as a combination of natural and human-made disaster, because what happened after the hurricane left us was a systematic process of erasure and silencing. I started out after the hurricane, when our classes resumed in the University of Puerto Rico, working with my students on their hurricane memoirs as a way to transition back into the classroom space, looking at a pedagogy that states that we need to recognize with respect our students' lived experiences outside of the classroom before they can re-enter our classrooms. Very, very naively, I thought that this was going to be a very small part of my classroom, that we would share our stories and then move back to the business of our syllabus. I myself was without electricity and running water for 96 days, and I was a lucky person. And so after that experience of reading my students' narratives by candlelight in my house as I was cooking dinner on a camp stove for myself and approximately 25 other people, I realized that it was untenable to return to business as usual. At that point, I started a large-scale public humanities project. I was working on my grant funding applications at a local cafe, which was the only place that had electricity and internet. When you reconnect power grids, what often happens is that damages are found by explosions. So 4 out of 5 times that I was working on my funding applications, I was interrupted by an explosion. I realized at that point that due to my position as a narratologist, I had an opportunity to help people tell their stories of environmental catastrophe and injustice. So that's my background and what I'm doing here.
So I'm David Glassberg, and I teach environmental history and public history at University of Massachusetts, Amherst. And to make the story as short as I can, I have been an environmental activist beginning, well, we could go way back, but say in 2012, an organization was founded up in my neck of the woods called Climate Action Now, and I was on the steering committee of that organization. I still am. And we decided that we wanted to reach out beyond just the immediate environment and upper valley of Western Massachusetts and reach down into Springfield and engage with poor people and people of color who are present where we live, but not in large enough numbers that we felt like we could make a bigger impact. So I connected with Arise for Social Justice, and we organized a conference in 2013. Out of that conference came the demand for the city of Springfield to create a climate action plan that would have a resilience coordinator to help with issues. This had happened actually just after a tornado hit Springfield, so there was that issue. They got a grant from HUD to do this and to create this plan. And I got a look at the budget for that, and I saw that almost all the money in the budget was going to pretty well-paid planners, and there really wasn't much money for community engagement in the plan. And then that's kind of where I switched hats, because I said, okay, I work at this university, I have resources at my disposal. So I got a public service endowment grant that paid for Spanish translation, food, a lot of things that essentially allowed for, childcare, allowed for these community engagement meetings around this plan to develop. And I had to kind of switch hats, because instead of just being the activist, I then was taking on kind of a role as a historian. And what we were trying to do was inject into this planning process for resiliency a environmental justice component to it. A very quick anecdote, because I think it's relevant for history, is they asked me, okay, you're a historian, why don't you do a timeline? So I presented a timeline that related to environmental issues in Springfield, and I started it with when William Pynchon came in the 1600s and dispossessed the land from the Indians and the fur trade and all that. And they came back to me and said, nah, we don't want anything before 1936. So fortunately, because they were in a hurry, I managed to slip in all the stuff that I wanted to slip in to the timeline, and it ended up an exhibit. But it says something about the kind of thinking that often we find in the world of planning and government, which doesn't really want to look at the deep roots of a lot of the problems that are facing us as a society. So essentially, that's kind of my entry point is, and I've continued to work with the Rise for Social Justice, and they're the principal partner on this next project that we'll be doing as part of the HOW project.
Uh-oh. Again, my name is Chief Mann. About 12 years ago, I actually became involved with the political aspect of our nation, and I ran and became the Turtle Clan chief, which is basically Passaic County, Sussex County, and Warwick area in New York. The reason why I would say that I got involved at a higher level, to be able to sit here in front of you all and at NYU and a couple other colleges, was that I had to watch my family die. Not just 2 people, not just 10 people, hundreds. 70, 80 people in the last 2 years that I actually had to go and do services for. And this was all due to the Ford Motor Corporation and their industrial motor vehicle plant in Mahwah that was brought there in the 50s. Our people, the Ramapough, Muncie, Lunaape, with the LU is the same as LE, Lunaape. We have been on the forefront of climate injustice since the beginning of colonization, and then maybe even before that. The industrialized world began here. You know, Patterson's not too far from here. So, you know, I don't have a college education. I'm educated in life. I'm very spiritually connected to this earth, and I am related to all of you, just as you are all related to each other and myself. We all have to breathe the air. We have to drink the water. We find ourselves in northern New Jersey still battling for 50 years for a cleanup. We sit atop of one of the most important mines in the founding of this country, even to the steel that holds the dome over the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., for those people who are supposed to protect us, write those laws that came from the Ringwood mines, from Peter's mine, the first cannonballs for the Revolutionary War. The Ringwood mine system had been utilized from every war, from the Revolutionary War to World War I, prep for World War II by the federal government. And then Ford, after a couple of sales, became the owners of 900 acres. And what they wanted to do was dispose us of that land. They wanted to remove us out of there, and we had nowhere to go. 900 to 1,200 people were living there. So the reason for that was that Ford Motor Corporation wanted to build executive housing. And in the end, when they could not do that, they almost immediately commenced to dumping the toxic waste, the paint sludge from the Mahwah motor plant in the mines, on the ground, next to homes, on the roads, in the woods, where we collect wild vegetables and where we collect berries and nuts and hunt and drink water from still a spring, even till 1990. So that is where I kind of come into the fold. And I think that, you know, most people who stand up for climate justice or climate change or environmental justice or environmental injustice are people who come from those places where it's been affected their lives. And what makes me excited about this project is that it gives me a larger voice, hopefully, but it's that larger voice for everyone, right? We stand at the forefront of trying to hold the town accountable for allowing the Ford paint sludge to be dumped, to trying to force the state of New Jersey to admit that they gave a permit for the industrial waste to be dumped in that community. And the 4 million people who drink the water in northern New Jersey. You know, we're responsible for the water that flows all the way down to Maryland, right? You've seen in the news lately that Newark has an issue with their water, and they say it's undisclosed source, but you know, Newark gets its water from up above, not just from their own reservoirs, but also from the Wanakee Reservoir, which is also polluted by the DuPont plant, right? So they pump the water from Pompton Lakes, which is known to be toxic, and they pump it up to the Wanakee Reservoir. So the Wanakee Reservoir gets double the dosage, you know. They don't test for the chemicals that are known to be there. They only test for certain things. You know, one of the things that had brought a lot of pressure on these people at one point was the fact that we had to stop actually telling our story. We had to stop saying our people are dying, and we had to say your people are dying. You're the ones who are drinking the water. You're the ones in Franklin Lakes that are drinking that water, right? You know, it's sad to say, but you know, Native people or indigenous people have always found a way to utilize things that have came across the waters to them, to turn around to utilize them, to help them to fix or resolve a solution. And that is no different than what we hear this morning about, you know, that the indigenous communities or communities of color are the ones who start these things. It's not just because, you know, they need to change it for themselves, but it's truly their way of life, right? I mean, our way of life is to have a garden, even in 2018, and it will be that way in the future. It's our hope that it's not something that it becomes absolutely necessary for us to be able to do, because we all rely on that, right? And in closing, I just wanted to, on Facebook, connected to other relatives out west, a Mohican brother, just from the Stockbridge. I put on Facebook one day, what would happen if the plague came to New York City? And would we natives, right, rush down from the mountains or from out west where they were disposed to go there to help? And me being myself, I will sit and listen to a room full of people for days, and then I'll just speak with everyone's thoughts, right? It's an uncanny thing I guess I have. But I watched it, and I watched it fester, right? Let them die. Yeah, they killed our ancestors. Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. And so after a week, I went on there, and I'm respected on there, which is nice. But I went on there and I wrote that we couldn't allow ourselves to become those people who did that to our ancestors and continue to do that to us even to today. Because if we were to do that, right, how would we be seen, for one? For two, eventually, by us allowing that to happen, would eventually affect us, and we would all die, right, or be affected in some way. And so you will, indigenous people, people of color, we fight for ourselves, but we're fighting for the larger community, even though they don't know it. And that's something that you won't find everywhere. So, thank you.
Okay. So with coming out of the Mayor's Commission work, some of us, during the time we were meeting, were talking about how, in some ways, the city of pluralism, the city of immigration, which is really such a thing that we're proud of in this region, right? That story that the city tells about itself, and with a variety of statues and monuments, tends to not be anchored historically with the realities of dispossession, the word that David used, and also enslavement. So I'm just, so unfortunately we don't have a lot of time left, but I would love to hear a little bit how you understand that in terms of Puerto Rico. I think Vincent's already clarified that very clearly. and David, how you see it being in Western Massachusetts, because in some ways we're talking about legacies and the stories that we tell retrospectively from the present day back, and how can we ground some of these perspectives in history without hectoring them or becoming a professor who people don't really want to listen to in that sense, right? So if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, that was an interesting question, but it was also a huge question. And so I'll try, within 2 minutes, let me answer that. One of the things that I found interesting in your opening comment was the relationship with Columbus that the Italian-American community in New York has. And obviously, coming from Puerto Rico, we have a very different relationship with Christopher Columbus and our interpretation of the advent of colonialism within the Americas. And instead of going off on a little rant about that, what I will do is I'll shift that conversation a little bit and say that when we're looking at the documents of what has become the United States, or the documents of the Americas, even in a larger sense, we find that those documents are actually autobiographical narratives, and Columbus's journal being the first literature of contact, which if you have read it, it's an absolutely horrifying document that speaks of the Taínos and the Caribs as the first indigenous peoples met by Columbus, in which Columbus dedicates multiple journal entries to saying, I have met the most wonderful, most beautiful, most kind people in the world. They will be incredibly easy to enslave. And so this is sort of the foundational document of the Americas and what so much has been built upon. So that's one thing that I'll say. The other thing that I'll say is that we do have both an overarching national narrative, the story of national identity, which is adopted, interpreted, and localized by multiple other communities. And what happens, I think most of us in this room understand that that's a sort of flattening narrative that says, let me pick out a couple of points and say, we all share this aspect of national identity. And when we move into our separate communities, we start to realize that this is both a unifying tactic, but it's also an exclusionary tactic. And what happened after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico is that we very, very clearly saw that, at least with this current administration, we don't fit into the national narrative, which creates a rhetoric of being despised people. And so I think that it's interesting that we have this sort of two facets to the idea of national identity as both a unifying and a divisive force. Did I? Okay.
I live in a town, Amherst, that was named after a guy who passed out in smallpox-infected blankets to the native people. So enough said about that in terms of commemoration and of dispossession. I want to use the little bit of time that I've got actually to switch gears a little bit. I was asked earlier to address a question related to, well, so what's the use of history in the climate crisis? And I want to leave you with a, well, not exactly leave you, but mention a quote and then expand on it a little bit. Rebecca Solnit, in an essay that she wrote a few years ago called Uncertain Weather, talked about the optimism of uncertainty and the idea that because of all these models that we have for climate change, that we're kind of in a very determined path, and it's a downhill path. And she points out that if you look at history, you see a lot of examples of social movements that do unexpected things. And it's really, people's movements that no one expected to be successful that in fact ended up triumphing in the end. And she uses a quote. She says, memory produces hope in the same way that amnesia produces despair. And I think that one of the things that history can do is give us some really great examples of social movements of the past that have overcome what seemed like really insurmountable odds.
Yeah. Sure. What do you guys want to talk about? No. Yeah, so, I think that as this whole thing plays out and as everybody moves forward, and I'm sure we'll talk about this throughout the course of the day, one of the things that struck me was the storytelling, right? Storytelling is beyond important to humans. It's been done written on stones and caves. It's been done written on leather, hides of animals. Storytelling is a different way, like language, right? We speak in the English tongue and it means nothing, right? The apple could be an orange. That's non-descriptive. And when we speak in our native language, like I don't know the word for eyeglasses or the word for pen, but the word is like this long, right? Because it describes what that is, what you're doing with it, and what the end result would be, right? So to keep that in a certain context into what's the importance of storytelling is that people like to hear stories. I could sit and listen to Jack speak forever. I mean, I might fall asleep once in a while, but it's not because he's boring. It's just that tone in his voice, right? And I'd have to say that even like the tone in my voice, right? It's resonating right now, right? You feel that, that's true, right? That's the truth. That's the power of being a human being, right? Is your humbleness. It's your humility that you carry forward with you. I could go into a room filled with people who don't even have any clue of what humility is. But by the time we leave, we've seen it. I've been all the way out west, I say all the way, but to the University of Dayton, Ohio, in a room filled with 200-300 people, and everybody was there because the folks from Standing Rock were coming, right? And even though I was set to speak, everybody was like, yeah, right, let's stand up, we're those people, and I was there saying, yeah, let's stand up, we're those people. And when I began to speak, I had to look out over this swath of people, and they changed from being people, right, to being humans, right? Their sole focus was on probably my mouth and the words that were coming out of there, because they couldn't bear to look at me in my eyes because the salty water, which is our memories, right, was flowing down my face. And I sat there in a room of so many human beings. It was one of the most amazing things. So as this project moves forward, you have to remember that there are stories to be told, but they have to be grounded in the shape of those humans that have been affected. And when you can do that, when you can tell that story, it is captivating, it's polarizing, it's you may even get me to show up somewhere other than New Jersey, right? Or New York. Or Puerto Rico, I mean, that's a perfect example. It's not just Puerto Rico, right? And it's not just last year. It has been that way for a very long time, and that's why history is important, because history is today, right? Tomorrow is going to be someone else's history. In 50 years from now, if we don't do something to save the lives of human beings, right? Because Mother Earth will fix herself, right? But we have to look back to see the things, our failures and all of those things, but also to see the successes and what works. And lastly, I would just like to say that we talk about everything in a global scale, and what has to happen is that it's okay to do that, but when we talk about the world, it's actually the world in which we live in. So right now, the only world which matters to us is the ones that are sitting in this room. This is our world, right? These are all your relatives. These are the people you love. These are the people you hate. But somehow, some way, you have to find the courage to face your own fears, right? Face your own truths. So just try to remember that, right? Keep your world here where you can actually make that difference, and allow those people that get a lot more zeros at the end of their check to figure out the rest. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to wrap up. I just want to say maybe two things. One is that part of what I've learned over these decades of doing oral history and working with communities, and I would say this is probably true for everybody on this panel, is that trust, such a simple thing as trust, is at the foundation of what we do. Building trust, building relationships, and being there when we're needed. It's not always easy, because we all have very different lives and very different schedules, and they're always conflicting. But to me, that's part of what I'm hoping we can do here, with me being here at Rutgers Newark, and hoping that we can work with Ramapough based on the relationships that we've had over the past couple of years. And clearly, the trusting relationships that are created in these kinds of emergency situations that are now becoming the everyday normal, right? Demands that trust be extended on a daily basis in these relationships. I should just say also that this is an image from a book that many of you may be aware of. Eric Sanderson and his team have done this incredible book called Manna-Hata, which is really the Lunaape term that's being debated, but one of the translations is the island of many hills. And after 1811, the whole island got bulldozed flat so that it could be a better real estate grid. So those are the streets that we know of today, except for parts of the island where the original topography is still there. But I think this contrast is something of a stark reminder of, on the one hand, the Hudson River, where whales were migrating with and kind of following the migrations of smaller fish. And where the lobsters, where the oysters were to the side, and also lobsters. There are stories of lobsters. Lobsters, I don't know if this is true, but 6-foot lobsters. Okay, so but the oysters were, and this I have proof of, 18 inches, right? So to be able to both have trust, but also to imagine and to be able to appreciate, and this is an incredible service that Eric Sanderson has done in terms of documenting the best guess as a wildlife ecologist of what this region was like in the year 1609, as he puts it, 2 hours before Hudson arrives, right? So we don't want to romanticize that, but at the same time, we do have to kind of reckon with the fact that this is a part of nature. We're a part of nature, and we tend to think of, as I had, that New Jersey is this industrial wasteland, et cetera, right? So how can I begin to unlearn and retrain my understanding of really being able to appreciate this as one of the richest estuaries in the world that now has been despoiled in a way that causes me to really want to work with Vincent all the more in this region, right? So thank you all for being here with us, and thank you, the organizers. We really think this is an incredible project, and we're really delighted to be a part of it.
Okay, thank you all again. We had some incredible insights shared from our panel. It's again a reminder about storytelling, which we're here to do, that it has to be centered from the people at the front lines, and that we have to consider our own community as our world and what that will look like for justice. What's our call to action? So they laid that out beautifully. Now it's time for a coffee break. And after the coffee break, we'll start our community university partner session. So if you are presenting, please make sure that you give your presentation to Shayna here before you go on your coffee break. And then also, if you can pull up the worksheet, which I will again remind you when we come back. So you have 10 minutes for a coffee break. partnership session, and I'll invite the panelists to come up to the stage. This session is going to be moderated by John Clinton, who is the interim dean at the Milano School at the new school. So I'll give them a chance to come up, and then we can start.
Oh, the podium? Or?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, they can't see.
Oh, I am right in the side.
Oh, thanks.
Yes, Josh coming right now. You're right, if I had to go up the stairs, I was like, I'll fall if I don't. There's over there.
All set? Okay, great, thanks. We have a very full stage, as you can see. I'm John Clinton. I teach environmental policy and sustainability management at the New School in New York City, and I'm delighted to be the moderator today. And I'll turn to our panel in a few minutes, but just tell you a little bit about some of the work that I've been doing that brought me here. About a year and a half ago, when the U.S. administration, the new U.S. administration, pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, some colleagues and I began an initiative to bring together people who are concerned about that and to gain momentum from the "We Are Still In" declaration that was issued by a number of corporations and a variety of institutions, governments, including state and municipal governments, and as well higher education institutions. So we called it leveraging We Are Still In. And that initiative was intended to bring together higher education and community partners who are focused on climate change, particularly interested in advancing climate justice. It's very interdisciplinary, so it spans largely folks in environmental policy and sciences, the natural sciences, but also, thanks to HAL, includes some folks who are working in the humanities. So we currently have about 65 faculty around the country who are doing this sort of work and are sharing through our network their resources, their learnings, and some of them are here today. Valerie Johnson, for one, is on our steering committee. Hi, Valerie, thanks, from Bennett College. And as well, Aaliyah Brown is on our steering committee, and I want to thank her and Liz and Margie for the invitation to be here. The network has basically tried to provide a forum in which we can, through using the website and various convenings, and as well video conferences and so forth, to share problem-solving solutions, approaches, and to bring people together to address some of the real challenges that come with this kind of work. So we're going to hear about some of that today, and we'll turn to our panelists to tell us a little bit about who they are, what they do, and what some of those challenges are, and especially how they approach the issue of climate justice.
Should we start? Can you cue them?
Hi, I'm Liz Kreider-Reed, and along with my colleague Phil Scarpino out there and our partners from KI, we're going to share a little bit about our work in Indianapolis. And we're going to start off with talking about the community partner. So, ask you to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Osley. I'm from Indianapolis with the Kepler Institute. So we're a community organization centered kind of in the downtown area of our city. Our motto is community empowerment through self-mastery, and we do all the things that we do through the lens of youth development. So a lot of our work is like targeted, ran from and by the youth. We're kind of made up of several different enterprises. So the biggest one that we have is called KI Media, and that is our media management team. So that's where we do all our marketing for other organizations as well as ours. We have websites, graphic design, and all sorts of things like that. Aside from the technology lens, we also are involved in like urban agriculture. So we have a community garden. We've experimented with like alternative gardening, so aquaponics, hydroponics. And urban agriculture is where we have like, that's where we do more work, even younger people than what I am. I'm just a junior in high school, but through the urban agriculture, we also have like summer camps where we focus on STEM, E-STEAM, girls E-STEAM clubs.
Yeah, that is. Do you want to talk about some of the citizen science that you've done? Citizen science-led testing.
Oh, right. So with our partnership with IUPUI, we also started a project a year or two ago called Healthy Cities Project. And if you didn't know, Indiana is ranked 14 for having the most contaminated lead in the soil. So we were going around and basically offering to test people's lots, people's houses for lead. And kind of how we incorporate that into our work is with the summer camp. When we started the project during the summer, we had youth go out and not, to actually test it, but they were able to grab the soil from us, or we take it back to the lab and test it. And we had videos and tutorials on how to do it and what you need to know about it. And yeah, that was the experience that we did, and it was really helpful because a lot of the younger kids didn't even know what lead was. And so not only were they learning about it, but how to stop it and what we can do because of it.
So I can speak a little more about. So my name is Aguila. I'm also from the Kepler Institute, and I'm an equity fellow focusing on climate and environmental justice. So in addition to some of the programmatic work that we do with young people, we're also part of the Climate Justice Alliance. And we work with communities also across the nation in solidarity with them, as well as locally working to kind of push the narrative on climate and environmental justice from an equitable perspective. And really oftentimes mainstream climate and environmental movements don't center the voices of the frontline communities. And as Chief Mann had said, a lot of our communities of color, indigenous communities have been doing this work and are centered in a human-centered and just perspective. And so we've been involved with a local sustainability plan around climate adaptation, but really trying to center equity in that, as well as facilitating an environmental justice assembly to help organize community members and those interested in trying to address environmental harms in our community. And with this project, we've been collaborating with IUPUI to help tell narratives and stories from our community and people who are in our organization, as well as those who are associated and partner and allies with us, about the different waterways in Indianapolis and how that has affected our community, but kind of just moving environment beyond just what the physical space, but also the social and political environment. And so for us, police brutality is an issue of environmental justice, lack of food access, poverty. These are all environmental justice issues that are tied to the planning and how power makes decisions for us, and how can we as an organization and community really push back against that. And through this project, really trying to highlight the stories and the agency of people in our community, and that a lot of times we often see that communities are kind of condescended to, that, while we are facing this oppression, we are not powerless, and that as Osley had shown and talked about, we are doing things in our community that are to help empower ourselves and to create better lives. So
We were also asked to give you a sense of what our partnership looks like. So we have a few more images from this, recognizing it's really only our first semester of what for us is going to be a full 2-year, 4-semester sequence. So this is for IUPUI, our third round. We were part of the Guantanamo and the States of Incarceration project. And one of the things I'm profoundly grateful for KI is that finding the right community partner, I think, is one of the most essential parts of it. And while we had really great experiences in the first 2 rounds, this one has been already so much richer. And so part of that process was the relationship building, having a lot of meetings, attending the things that KI was already doing, getting to know what their capacities were, their strengths, and really humbling, because as for the faculty side, I didn't know anything about Guantanamo when we did that. And then I learned a whole lot about the history of mass incarceration. Okay, now a new project. This is not anything I have expertise in. So to partner with a group like KI isn't just their knowledge and roots of community, it's also their expertise in environmental justice, environmental history, and the principles of justice. So there was a lot of that relationship building, trust building that happened before we executed the memorandum of agreement, which we did. And it's really just been creating a space to do the work we're doing. They've also really helped us shape our story. As Agila said, we're focusing on waterways, and we had some ideas, and Phil Scarpino had done a lot of work around this, and other people, Rivers of the Anthropocene Project. But one of the things they pointed out was that in addition to thinking about waterways that were visible, we needed to pay attention to a groundwater contamination site that is Superfund eligible, currently kind of in somewhat of a liminal status, and that this is what the community really cared about. So we switched things out, and that's one of our focused projects. The other thing that's been really so powerful about this is that we have met at KI, and KI has come to our classes. And one of our earliest class meetings, and here it was in the kind of preschool space, so there's nothing like humbling like sitting on a little tiny chair and hearing the incredible work that they were doing. And our students got to not just read about these principles of just transition and the Climate Justice Alliance, but then to hear the work of people who've been really giving their lives and their energy to creating that kind of change in the community. This was our second week of class. Literally the second meeting was in this space and hearing those stories. As I said, KI has also been amazing. They have had somebody from the KI team at every one of our class meetings throughout this semester, whether we're on tours in the neighborhood or meeting in our class space on campus. And like most urban universities, coming to class on campus it's not a small thing, and they've been that way. They've also been really amazing as far as connecting us with community organizations. Agila was talking about that storytelling, seeing the work. So it was like with their guidance that we've made these connections, and the students have gotten to hear from the people doing this kind of work with Mapleton Fall Creek Development and with Groundworks Indy, these grassroots organizations. And then we've also partnered with the KI New Media, and they're actually helping us do some of these recorded audio and video interviews. So we're not just hearing their stories, but they're helping us actually produce them. And I think the last thing that we were sort of asked to talk about was some of the challenges that we're finding. And you can elaborate on this with 1 minute we have left. But the 3 things I think we both identified were, 1, co-production of knowledge. That sounds fabulous. Shared authority, we're all in. Our students are struggling with just production of knowledge, wrapping their brains around climate justice, this history, this complexity, and then how to do it really in partnership. We're wrestling with that. Reflection, that's an important part of the guidelines. We totally get it. But again, the train is speeding out. You've got 15 weeks. You need to produce all this stuff. They're journaling, but I don't think we've really figured out how to have meaningful reflection. And then the third thing is we come at this with academic expectations and grants and reports and all that. And what we've really done, I think, is created a very organic space for these things to happen. But there's sometimes some collision of expectations. Our students are like, where's the rubric? We keep getting that question. We're like, you're co-creating this. It's an evolving, and they like, give me the rubric. So we're still trying to, it's partly organizational cultures, and it's partly just this is the nature of this kind of community-based co-curation. It's hard, it's uncomfortable, it's a little chaotic and uncertain, which makes it good but scary.
Hello everyone, I'm Maria Moreno. I am a professor in the Social Studies Department at UAM, Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana in Mexico. And Laura is my community partner.
Hi, I'm Laura Freyermuth from Ciudadanía 19S from Mexico City.
So we're going to talk a little bit about our partnership. We decided to take on for this project the reconstruction after the earthquake that happened in September 19 last year in Mexico City. So this was what the first image I saw after the earthquake happened in my phone in a WhatsApp message. So we didn't know what it was. It seemed like a smoke, but it was the building that had fallen, and it was all the dust in the air. So Mexico City is particularly vulnerable to earthquakes because it's built on a lake. So in that image, you can see the lake bed. Oh, sorry. The lake bed, and all the red dots are the buildings that collapsed, and they were at the edge of the lake bed. So we live in this constant state of risk, and it really crosses across class lines, race lines. Everybody can be at risk in different degrees, but it's like the whole city. It's kind of, it shouldn't be there. So after the earthquake, the civil society response was very, very strong, trying to help, because the government response wasn't that great, so somebody had to take it on. And that is how Laura and I first kind of crossed paths, because she was working with Verificados 19S, which was an organization that preceded Ciudadanía 19S. That is where she works now. And I was working at that collection center handing out tools. So they were verifying that what was requested was actually needed. And we were handing out the tools. So we didn't know back then that we were going to work together, but it's the first contact we had. So later, more community organizations started to happen, and that is how Verificados 19S switched to Ciudadanía to help to help communities organize their rebuilding process. So then we started working together when we learned about the Humanities Action Lab. Actually, Monica and I met because I live in the central neighborhood that was more severely damaged, and I was a neighbor, and I attended one of the meetings trying to figure out the actual damage of the neighborhood and have a real census of what had happened, which we don't have yet. Over a year has happened. So we started with the first class, and in the first class last quarter, because we have only 11 weeks quarters, we started working with Ciudadanía, and at the beginning, the collaboration was not as strong as it is now. They were in class only 4 or 5 times during the quarter, and the students, it was mainly a theory class where we tried to learn from what was social justice and what were we doing, and trying to decide in which communities we were going to work, because it's very extensive and the options were very wide. So we were kind of trying to figure out what to do. And also, so we were the first ones to start this project because of our calendar. So we didn't have a lot of guidelines of what to do, so we just did whatever came to mind. And we had the students produce maps like this one, trying to map where the damaged buildings were. They did a podcast, 2 videos, and we faced the challenge of not having worked together as closely as we should have. So for the second quarter, we started working together from building the syllabus. So we built the syllabus together. We started We had a lot of sessions together. Laura is most of the days in the classroom with us, and we also go out with someone from Ciudadanía to the different neighborhoods that we're working on, and that has really proven to be very, very good. I think working as close as you can, it really improves the whole process. So now I hand it.
Thank you. So now that we are starting the second trimester, it's been a process of learning what worked and what didn't work in the last one. And we wanted to share it with you because we know that maybe you're starting the process, so it might be helpful. Just to let you know, as Maria was showing, the earthquake in Mexico City happened on the 19th of September of 2017. And still, even when Mexico City is one of the biggest cities, it had a failed emergency attention, and the reconstruction process has been a consequent series of human rights violations that are deepening the social inequity in the city. So for this trimester, we chose 3 cases, which are Tláhuac, which you can see there, with these damages on the soil. Second case is Condesa, which is the central neighborhood where Maria lives, which is a middle class, upper class neighborhood, but still with damage. And the third one is San Gregorio Xochimilco, which is in the south of the city, which is an original town from a pre-Hispanic town. So it has a long story, and it's severely damaged as well. So could you help me with the next one? Thank you. It was important for us now, as Maria was saying, to choose in the middle of a great topic, specific cases. So we can start building these narratives and starting to find the common points, but also what's starting to being different in each of the areas. Also, as Maria was saying, we started to build this inner narrative, because we have found that it's really complicated because it's a multi-actor thing. We have we have the university, we as an organization, the students, the neighbors, the communities, and the experts, and everybody has a particular view of what happened, what should happen, and what is going to happen. So it's really a process of having time and spaces to connect and to reflect, to see that we are talking about the same thing. I mean, one learning is not to give something for granted, that everybody understands the same that you are understanding. So we have to slow down, stop there to make sure that we are on the same channel. And then starting to see that also every actor has different time paces and spaces. For example, for the neighbors, they want to be interviewed, they want to participate, they are very thankful that the stories are being told, but they have no time because they want reconstruction now. And they have to have it. And the students are well, I'm starting the trimester, I'm trying to figure out what's going on, and so they are having a slower pace. No? So it's kind of interesting to see how you can connect those paces and those expectations also, because it's really important for us to tell the community that we are helping to tell the stories, but we are not having, at least with the students, a specific way of doning or something else. It's different. It's something intangible. A narrative is intangible. For someone who needs immediate attention, it's kind of confusing, but it has worked because it's also helping them rebuild the stories and having clarity of what has happened, and especially that what has happened is not fair. We also, so to help with this, we had the classes, and also we had a Skype meeting in the class with Aliyah, so that the students could see that HAL existed and it's not something imaginary, and that there are many people here too. So can you help me, please? And now that we received the 360 cameras, we've started doing this documentation, and so it's also for the community to see the camera and everything. It's interesting. And just as a final message, we wanted to present you these pictures that were from a year ago, from the earthquake, a couple of weeks after the emergency had ended. And they're in Spanish, but I can read them to you. This one says, being Mexican is something you have to be proud of. But me being a Mexican Chilango, which is someone from Mexico City, how do you translate this? It's like, it's awesome. Well, with some Mexican words there. And then here, as you can see here, we have these flowers, which are actually like the typical flowers from Day of the Dead, which is happening right now. And it says resilience. And here in the center, it says, we want this crisis to make us awake into a community more sensitive and more fair. And we did this because we think that this is the key core that we have to keep pushing through this process. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Rizzo. I'm an assistant professor of history and associate director of American Studies here at Rutgers University, Newark. And I am here with Shasha Wang from the American Friends Service Committee. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about the partnership that we had during the last HAL project on states of incarceration. And particularly our focus was on immigration detention. But the relationship with AFSC and Rutgers predates HAL and has also continued past the project. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So and we're going to pass the mic back and forth. So we'll play this as it goes. So there you go.
Sounds good. So again, my name is Jia Wang. I am the organizing and advocacy director for the American Friends Service Committee's Immigrant Rights Program here. And some of you have heard of AFSC for many years. We are international and national organization, and we work on a variety of issues. So the Immigrant Rights Program is based here in Newark and is AFSC's largest domestic program. So we have legal service staff, we have organizers, and we have we house a lot of law interns, public policy interns, and then we have a variety of partnerships throughout the years with Rutgers, and we're very proud of those partnerships because. First, because Rutgers, we're in the same city, and second, Rutgers Newark is actually the most one of the most diverse campuses in the country, and we thought that it's very important for us to really sort of provide a space for student and future, I guess, generation of leaders, and that we can transfer the information and the knowledge. To those. So that's why we thought that the partnership with Rutgers, with different schools is very, very important to us, and we're very proud. So just focus on the just give a little bit background of immigration detention here in New Jersey. And I do want to say, though, there's a huge overlap between immigrant rights and human migration and immigration, environmental justice. And so, people, there are a lot of environmental issues that push people to move, and that, this is AFSC role and mission to facilitate that process. And one day when, it's time for them to go home and they choose to go home, and we will also support that. So a lot of the migrant experience in their country is that their land no longer can produce food, and that they decide to move, and it could be because of man-made policies. It could be because of climate change, and then also the construction of border walls and detention centers actually has a huge environmental impact on on the land and our community. So I just want to mention that quickly. So in New Jersey, it's actually probably the sixth or the seventh largest, has the sixth or seventh largest immigrant detention population in the country, unfortunately. And we have quite a few county government that have contract with Immigration Customs Enforcement to house large number of immigrants for immigration purposes. So they make money off immigration detention, and they pass it down or back to their county to offset, county deficit. So there is a huge profit making, and that's really sacrificed the human sort of the impact that immigration detention on people, migrants and citizens communities. So, I think it's important for us to all know that, these are not just numbers, and it could be our, friends and neighbors. And it doesn't happen just in New Jersey, it happens in other states, in the United States as well. We actually, as a matter of fact, are accompanying the migrant caravan traveling through Central American countries into Mexico. And then we'll facilitate that, accompany them until, they reach their destination. Thank you. Yeah, so, I saw some women portraits on Facebook news feed, and those are beautiful. Just the people women who have brought their children, embark, in this long journey by foot. And that, just to signify how the beautiful human migration journey could be. So just back to the partnership a little bit more. So when Mary came to Rutgers, and then also Tim, reached out to us about this project, really to try to provide students with information about the migration, the detention status quo in New Jersey, and then to connect them to, and give them access to the jails. And so the student can see the people who are incarcerated for, immigration purposes firsthand. So I want to give it back to Mary so that she can talk about whether, that has any impact, and then, the other parts of the project.
Thank you. Yeah. So really quickly, since we don't have a lot of time, the class that I taught for HAL was a graduate seminar in American Studies focused on immigration detention, specifically the Elizabeth Detention Center, which is about 10 miles from here, and it is a federal facility, but it is privately run. And frankly, I didn't know it existed before I started working on the project, and none of my students knew it existed, and that is the point. You're not supposed to know it exists. It is hidden on purpose. And so these issues have become much more visible even in just the couple of years since we did the project originally. But at that point, people were not sort of as aware of immigration detention, and certainly not in a state like New Jersey that touts itself as so diverse and so welcoming. Any case, so our focus was on the Elizabeth Detention Center, and particularly a quote-unquote riot that happened there in 1995. There's so much that we could talk about with that class, which was just absolutely amazing. But in terms of the partnership with AFSC, and we also had a second community partner, an organization called First Friends, which works with detainees. So they go into the detention facilities and kind of provide support in that way. So we had two great community partners, but I'll talk a little bit about how we worked with AFSC. And there were three main ways. And of course, before the class began, there was a lot of stuff that we did pre-semester work of meetings and back and forth and conversations to build that trust, and also to have shared expectations about what this project really is about. But during the actual course of the semester, AFSC, a former employee of AFSC came in and gave my students a guest lecture on immigration detention to kind of get us up to speed with what it is, but also the immigration process, which is very complicated. So it was really important to have that perspective for my students. Secondly, and this I think is really, really important, is as we were going through the process of creating the exhibition panel and also the digital materials, we invited AFSC and First Friends in to basically be like peer reviewers, right? So I had all of my students present what they were doing, and had Shasha and Amy and then some folks from First Friends there as well. And my students were terrified. They were terrified because they're used to having to present their stuff to me, a professor who, it's like they don't care that much what I think, but to present it to the people who are the real experts who were doing this work on the ground was so meaningful and powerful to them that it really made such a difference, I think, in the end product. So I would really recommend thinking about that. And then finally, as Shasha sort of alluded to, AFSC helped us get a tour of the Elizabeth Detention Center, which was, if my students remember nothing else about this class, they will remember that tour for the rest of their lives, because we had spent 7, 8 weeks reading about detention, and nothing prepared us for how horrible it actually was to be there and to talk to people who were there. And that's a story that would be happy to talk to anybody about afterwards. So one of the things, so that was sort of how we worked together to produce the materials. You know, one of the things that I think though is really important in particular about our partnership and relationship is that it's continued past the class. You know, obviously these issues around detention are only becoming more visible, more important. And so, you know, as Shasha mentioned, there are counties in New Jersey, including the one we're in right now, Essex County, that has a contract with ICE to house detainees at its county jail. And so, you know, we are involved in campaigns to deal with that contract, to terminate that contract, and to think about what is really happening with the detainees. So it's a partnership that went well beyond what the class was. And I think that that's really key, because that trust that's built means that it's not just a one and done kind of thing. So anyway, I'm out of time, and I apologize for running over. So.
Well, if I can, Mayor, just to pick up on that last word you mentioned, trust. We heard about the importance of trust. Thanks. We heard about the importance of trust from our colleagues in Indianapolis and how critical it is to build that trust. We got a perspective on the international dimensions of the partnerships from our colleagues in Mexico City. And here we learned a bit about what it means to go through all of the cycles of such a partnership. So we're going to turn to Aaliyah in a moment to give us some instructions, some guidance in terms of developing a framework for these partnerships as you go forward. Thank you all very much. Thanks to our panelists.
Okay, again, I want to thank the panelists who gave us some very practical advice about structuring an intentional partnership, which is so critical to how we work at HAL. So right now we are going to enter the practical workshop phase of this panel. So the first thing that has to happen is a little bit of exercise, a little bit of movement. If you're not sitting next to your community partner, well, I should rephrase that. University and community partners should be sitting next to each other for the next part of the project. So if you all are not sitting next to each other, find a table that you can work at together. So I'll give you all a few moments to do that. And if you are here by yourself, so if your community partner isn't here or your university partner isn't here, you can buddy up with another group. So find someone to adopt you. That's your other charge if you're here by yourself. Okay. Now, hopefully you all everyone is with their partners. Raise your hand if you're all connected with your partner, if you're with your university and community partner. Great. Okay, we're gonna. There's one table if anyone wants to adopt Liz as a partner. Okay, now that everyone's together, The next important part of this workshop is the worksheet that we're all going to be working on together. So you can access the worksheet one of two ways. The first is digital, so the worksheet will look like, it's going to come up on the screen in a second. And if you cannot access it digitally, there's a paper copy on each of your tables. Oh, now we have it up. So this is one of the documents that we sent to you in a Google Drive in the folder. And if you have a device, you can work on the worksheet from there. If you are working on the worksheet digitally, we ask that you copy it and actually type into the document. So don't type into this one, but make a copy and type into once we start figuring it out. And I can come around once we get started. Oh, yes. So I'm going to give you all just a little bit of context and background before we get started. Okay, so the Humanities Action Lab is made up of partnerships. That's one of the reasons why we're focusing on developing and structuring great or intentional community partnerships. So facilitators, if I can have everyone